I don't want to get like sentimental here, but you don't think there's something cool or unique about the idea that in any major American city, you can like walk around and you can find Hispanic people, you can find all sorts of Asian people, Middle Eastern people, African people, European people that are all like working together, living together on the bus, on the subway, and Ubers. Like you don't think there's any unique success there that America can claim?
Ideally, but it's not working. We've become too liberal, and you see the destruction of it. Like my city, New York City, it's got too liberal, too accepting of everything, doesn't have any core values, and it's falling apart.
Sure, and I can agree with you there.
Something has been happening in the past few weeks, and I am not the only one to notice it. As they always do, the winds of culture are blowing in a new direction. This conversation and the others like it that have been happening in the last few weeks point towards something tectonic. As most of you know, the Hispanic guy you see in the upper right corner here is Nick Fuentes. And if you were so disconnected from real life that you still watched MSNBC as a news source, this is how they would describe him.
And while the MAGA rally atmosphere has become the mainstream for the Republican Party, the real vanguard of the conservative movement was at a competing adjacent event. Now listen to what Nick Fuentes, the anti-Semitic white nationalist leader of the conference, said just before introducing his special guest, Congresswoman Green.
And you want to know the secret? To borrow a phrase from a friend of mine, our secret sauce here, it's these young white men.
And here is what is so critical to understand. This panel is the nightmare for so many supposedly well-informed people. An unmediated, unregulated discussion about racial differences broadcast to hundreds of thousands of regular people. The topic of racial differences is such a lethally divisive issue that has the potential to utterly unravel our society. And yet, there is something so bizarre and oddly reassuring when I contrast the doomsday fear and perspective of intellectuals that I respect, normie intellectuals, with the reality that I witnessed with my own eyes. Here's Coleman Hughes, for example, in conversation with Charles Murray, the man who brought the topic of racial differences to the mainstream conversation decades ago.
Let's say that tomorrow, the American Psychological Association, the powers that be in psychology, weigh in on this and completely agree with your position empirically. I'm thinking about the social consequences of that for race relations in this country, and it seems to me to be absolutely poisonous. And I'm picturing this situation, and it seems to me to be an absolute disaster for the social fabric.
Because of the natural difference between people, difference in cultures, behaviors, habits,
Say
customs,
difference in genes,
these kinds
that's what
of
you
things.
mean. Difference in genetics.
Well, because they're different, Destiny. They're different
Say
on many
well, just
levels.
say what you mean. You mean difference in
you
genetics.
Know, Destiny, you know, you're such a rat the way you debate.
I just want you to be clear.
Sneaky.
You mean that
We have
black?
Sneako,
I'm
we
not
have
being sneaky.
Sneako, we have sneaky. You're sneaky.
I'm just
Because
trying to
what you guys
make, when you
do
say,
here-
I just want to be clear what we're talking about. We're not, we don't mean, hold on.
Hey, shout out, yo, white on white violence, W in the chat. Let's go. Keep it
Destiny,
going.
get out of here.
Hang on, because we could argue.
Talk to the hand, Destiny.
I'm just saying, let's just be clear. When we say black people are different, we don't mean
Well, hang
culturally,
on, we
we
can
mean
argue where the
biologically
differences
different.
come from.
You mean
We can
biologically
argue-
different.
Call me crazy, but this doesn't seem to be a disaster for the social fabric. And consider this. Who are the kind of people that the media constantly and justifiably warn about as a danger to society? Dispossessed young men who spend too much time in online echo chambers. And what do we have here? A conversation between people who violently disagree with each other about a catastrophically divisive topic, doing it in a relatively healthy manner, and broadcasting it to an audience of potentially millions upon millions of exactly the kind of people who are most at risk of being radicalized by being in online echo chambers that lack exactly the kind of meaningful discourse on display right here. Older generations grew up being told to never bring up politics or religion. That's why they suck at talking about it. This generation, for all its cringeworthy flaws, is at least learning how to engage the most difficult ideas with relative grace. You want to know how to disarm the, quote, white nationalist, anti-Semitic, vanguard leader of the fascist Republican Party? You let someone with more IQ points than you engage with his ideas and expose them for their obvious flaws in front of a huge audience.
That's true. I'm a Christian nationalist, and I agree with you that 90% of the problems are going away from God. The people that run the country are not godly.
And you look at their hero, right? In Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not exemplify Christian values. You know what I'm saying? But that is right now the messiah of the right.
True.
See, I can be nuanced.
It almost feels like you acknowledge that there's a more rational position that you could inhabit, but instead you feel some obligation to be the pole against the unreasonable of the left by being unreasonable on the right. It almost sounds like you're saying a reasonable position would be the official story of 9/11 is probably true, although some of it's kind of weird, but you can go to any news station and see that. So it's my job to be the counter voice, to be as reactionary as possible, to be this multipolar force against the progressive left on every single issue. But then at some point, are you just feeding into the same insanity? Instead of looking at this as a dichotomy of like left versus right, and I want to be like keeping the tension, like can't we view it as like truth versus untruth, or information versus misinformation, where we're pushing in a direction where we're just trying to be more honest instead of more ideological? Because it feels like that's your pull right now.
And so I say to Stephen Bennell the second or the third or whatever you are, and everyone else engaging in these horrific but necessary conversations, good luck and Godspeed.